Today we're going to do a Cambridge series enclosure installation. So I've got everything here to do that. And here's the instructions. It's telling me that I need to put the header right on the center of the curb. So the first thing I'm going to do is lay that out. Now here's an old trick that I like to use for finding the center of a curb. I use my combination square. I just make a mark one way, make a mark the other way, and even if it's not exactly in the center, I end up with two lines that are close together and I can just shoot down the center of that. It just makes it quick and easy and takes the guesswork out of it. In this case, I've got about a 1/16 inch gap between the two lines that I can use for my control line on the curb. Next, I'm going to set up my trusty laser. I love this self-leveling laser. It'll shoot a laser line 360 degrees in like 3 different directions. Cost me about $500. Well worth it. So what I do is I'll get my laser line close to my marks, just about dead on, and then I'll just scoot the feet of the tripod around like this until the line is dead on my marks. I find that's a good way to get it just perfect. Once everything's on layout, I'll go ahead and make a mark on each side for my control line. Usually put a little circle around it just to make sure that I don't lose track of it or confuse it with some other mark. So the instructions show that I need to take the height of my enclosure, subtract 4 7/8, and that's going to be the bottom of my bracket. So I'm setting up my laser line. I moved it off of my mark, off my control mark, to the highest point on the curb. Now this is important. In this case, the curb is sloping down into the shower so that the water will drain in. That means the outside edge is higher, and that's why I moved my line over to that when I got my height mark. Otherwise, if I set it up in the center of the curb, that point would be a little low, and what I found in the past is that if you do that, you'll end up with not enough room on the outside. Your outside panel will drag because the header is actually too low in that spot. So find the highest part of the curb, should be the outside, measure up from there and use that as your starting point. Then the panel on the inside may be a little bit higher than it needs to be, but it's okay, it'll work fine. Once I've got that height, I set my laser up on it, and rather than measure over on the opposite side, I use my laser line to get that mark, get the height on that side. Then I always like to double check with the height measured down from where I think the enclosure should end up. Just double check my math. Okay, now that I got my marks in place, I'm going to take my bracket. Now, I like to make a little mark in the center of my bracket. And I use my trusty combination square to get that little mark. Same way. Then I can hold that mark on my center line mark, and I know I've got it right where it needs to be. Make sure it's nice and straight, up and down. Mark my 2 hole locations. And it's just as simple as that. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Made the same mark on the other bracket. Line it up. Make sure that it's nice and straight. Mark my hole locations. Looks good. I'm ready to drill. These guys sent me a couple of free bits to try out. So I'm going to try them out on this job. Let's see if they're any good. Actually, they did turn out to be pretty good drill bits. Now, this tile looked like porcelain, but it turns out it wasn't. It's just ceramic tile. So it was pretty easy to drill, and that's always nice. And actually, one of the nice things about this Cambridge series enclosure is that you have so few holes that you have to drill. It's just 2 holes on each bracket that holds the header, and then you end up drilling a couple holes in the curb for the guide, and we'll see that later. There's no wood back there behind the tile. Big surprise. And since they send screws that are number 12 screws, I had to actually drill 1/4-inch holes. And whenever I'm using these concrete anchors, the plastic plugs, I like to tap them through the tile, especially when the tile is soft, like this tile is, so that the plugs don't expand when the screw runs in and crack the tile. I've had that happen before, and that sucks. So again, I drilled a 1/4-inch hole. I used a green expansion plug, concrete anchor, tapped it in all the way past the tile into the hardy backer I'm sure is back there behind the tile. Use that number 12 screw that is provided by CRL. Here we are again on the other side, same thing. I'm using these porcelain drill bits, these spade tip bits, for my pilot hole on each one. I just like these pointy bits. They're really accurate, really easy to get it right on layout. They don't walk off, and you get a really accurate hole location. And then after I punch through with that bit, I'll take a regular 1/4-inch masonry bit and just remount the hole to a 1/4-inch so I can use my handy dandy trusty green plugs in each side, and that's going to receive my number 12 flathead screws. So I think for a number 12 screw, you're supposed to drill a 5/16 hole, and you're supposed to use a blue plug. And CRL actually includes some plugs with their hardware, but they require, you have to drill at least a 5/16 hole, and I don't want to drill holes that big there. So here it is, stainless steel header. See how this is put together? They've welded it together with these little stainless steel blocks, and they leave some space on the end where you've got to cut it. They use this little round, I think it's a nylon piece of plastic, as a spacer. You're going to need a portaband for this to make it easy and fast. I've got this set up on my saw stand, on my chop saw stand, just because it's an easy place to work. But don't make the mistake of trying to cut it with your regular chop saw, because you're going to break all the teeth off. Portaband is great for this. I've had to cut one of these headers with a hacksaw before, and it can be done. It's not that big of a deal, it takes some time to do. Portaband is really nice and accurate and clean. The cuts don't have to be perfect though, because it's going to end up getting captured in the header brackets on each side. Some of that WD-40 is a good idea. A little lubrication makes everything work better. And we're going to finish cutting the other side of the header. It's basically just 2 Serenity headers welded together. If you've ever done a Serenity series, you know what that's like. I do not like them. I avoid them like the plague. But This Cambridge series I like. It is a nice enclosure. All right, so the instructions say cut a 1/2 inch off the header, 1/2 inch from the finish opening width, and that seemed to work just right. Fits right in there. So my laser back up and measure down to check the level. Just double check it, make sure that it's nice and level. Looks pretty good. This is the stopper. There's one for each side to stop the panels from sliding into the wall. Don't do what I'm doing here because I'm putting it on the wrong side. Actually, that stopper needs to go on the outside of the header. And the one that I'm putting on the left needs to go on the inside of the header. I figure that out before I actually hang the glass. So these are the little caps that go in the top of the bracket on each side. They're not exactly square, they're a little bit rectangular, so they fit one way and not the other way. The installation instructions don't actually say which way goes up, whether the little cap goes at the top or at the bottom. So I guess they just assume that common sense says it goes on top. Okay, now I've got the first panel. I'm going to start with the inside panel. This glass is treated with diamond seal. So I am going to make sure that I have the inside in and the outside out. So I've got the inside facing me. Since this is the inside panel, the rollers are going to go pointing to the outside. Make sense? And I'm just going to put in the rollers, the two that go on top, so that I can hang this panel. And then I'll come back and put the bottom ones on later, of course. I mean, you wouldn't be able to hang it if you had all the rollers on first. And just finger tight is just fine to start with. I always keep a bunch of these black rubber pads. These are 1/4 inch pads, hard rubber, and they're great for setting glass on. So I always have a stack of those so I can set my glass down, sweep up a little, and putting a couple stacks of a 1/2 inch of pad for me to set my glass on. That way I can get the glass in there on the other side of the header, step in, basically just set the glass in place. Once I get the inside panel set on the header, I always roll it a little bit in each direction just to make sure it's actually sitting on the header the way that it's supposed to, rolling freely back and forth. That tells me that's where it really goes. And move on to panel number 2, the outside panel. Again, I've got the treated side toward me. So in this case, the outside panel has the rollers facing in to the shower. Once again, I'm going to put on the top 2 rollers. Just get them finger tight. That'll allow me to get the glass in place, rolling on the header, and then I'll be able to make adjustments, add the other rollers, do the rest of the work. You can see now if you look at the header that the bumper on the right is actually on the outside and the bumper on the left is actually on the inside. So I switched those. I realized that I had made that mistake before I actually started hanging the glass, which was nice. So I didn't have to take all the glass off to switch them back. Now both panels are on and we're ready to go to the next step. I like to put on the little sweeps on the bottom of the panels at this point. This is a cool feature of the Cambridge series. And this is the first sliding barn door type enclosure I ever saw that had these sweeps incorporated, which is a brilliant idea in my opinion. The one thing that's always been missing from these is just a little water diversion. So what they did was they designed the guide to be wide enough to allow the glass and a sweep to pass through it. I like these little tubing cutters for cutting my plastics. They work great. Cut them both to size. Then I'm going to actually put these sweeps on the glass while it's hanging from the header. I just find this is just about the most convenient way for me to do this, working by myself. Two guys, it's easy to do a lot of things, but when you're working alone, you have to be creative. And I'm not sure, I don't think there's anything unsafe about this, as long as you know you don't want to lift up, put too much pressure on the bottom and, make the thing jump the track. But I find that if I'm cautious, I'm able to put those sweeps on with the glass hanging in place, no problem. Once I've got the sweeps on the inside and the outside, I can work on the guide. There it is. And it's a pretty cool guide. So this is what I do. Slip it on the inside panel, move it to about the center of the opening, get the outside panel started into the guide as well. Once both panels are in the guide, I can close both doors and just kind of decide where the center of that opening should be. So I basically just close both panels and then eyeball the guide to get it in the center of where the glass overlaps, basically. You could use a tape measure for this if you wanted, I suppose, but I find if it looks good, it is good. Carefully open the panel so I can come out. Now what I'm doing is measuring the glass at the top. So I'm measuring the reveal. And if I get the reveal the same at the top and the bottom, I don't really care so much if it's perfectly plumb. It's more important that the reveal looks good than it is that a level shows you that it's plumb. Once I figure that out, I'll go ahead and sort of trace around my guide. So just make a few marks so that I can remove the guide and replace it after I've marked some holes and drilled it and anchored it and all that. So I'll get all of the marks that I can reach. And then take the guide out of the way. Now I can push the glass out of the way like this, put the guide down, find my marks, and then take these little black plastic guides out. That'll expose the holes where your screws go. Set the guide back in place. Mark the hole locations. And now I'm ready to drill those. Now, I could have taken this glass off and set it aside at any point, and it would be out of my way, because really I'm going to have to take the glass panels off of the header anyway at some point to put it back on in the guide. But I find leaving the panels hanging in place, it keeps them out of my way for the most part, and it's a safe place for them to be, and it's just kind of my style of doing it. You may not really agree or think it's a good idea. You may have your own way of doing it, and that's fine. Just kind of showing you the way that I do stuff, and it works for me. I find it comfortable, and yeah, it just feels good. That's important. All right, here we're using number 10 screws, so a 3/16 inch hole. And I like these white concrete anchors. They're the white plugs that fit a 3/16 inch hole. They're made for like a number 8 screw or smaller. You're not really supposed to use a number 10 screw, but it will work. And the same is true as before. I like to tap that plug all the way through the hole so that when I run the screw in and the plug expands, it won't crack the tile. Very important. Get it started with a hand driver just to make sure I like where it is. Then come along with my cordless. Run each screw the rest of the way in. And now that the guide is anchored in place, I can pop my black plastic guides back in there. I'll have to move this panel out of the way so that I can get the other one off, set into place. Back on the header. Probably isn't recommended to work in socks either, but sometimes I do. People don't like me wearing shoes in their house, and those little boot covers are slippery, and I hate using those. I'd rather go around in my socks than wear those boot covers. So again, maybe don't want to do this exactly the way that I do, but this is kind of how I do it. So now that that's done, go around and tighten up all the set screws. There's some set screws on the bottom of the bracket. There's some set screws in the cap that slides in on the top of the bracket. There are a couple of set screws in the bumpers, 2 on top and 2 on bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and tighten all those up at this point. I think you can use those bottom set screws to adjust the header up just a little bit, maybe a 32nd or to a 16th if you needed to fine tune the leveling of it. And just check to make sure that everything's rolling pretty smoothly. The guides at the bottom with the bottom sweeps in place will add a little bit of resistance to the way that it rolls, which in my opinion is not a bad thing, because these things will roll so smoothly and so quickly that people might have a tendency to just slam them a little bit. So I like the little extra resistance that it gets from the guides. Comes with these trusty tools, a little spanner wrench, and a little really thin wrench that'll fit in there. So as you know, if you've worked with these rollers, these types of rollers before, you know they're cammed. So as you turn them, the wheels go up and the wheels go down. I like to get them set to the highest point to start with. And then it makes it easy just to adjust one side down a little bit if it needs to fix the reveal and make it just right. So they include these wrenches with every kit, which is kind of cool. So I'll take the wrench, turn it to the utmost position like that, and then you can tighten it down into place. It takes a little bit of practice working with these things to get a real feel for how they operate. I mean, it doesn't take long at all before you figure out just how to tighten them and how to adjust them and get the reveal that you want. Now that the bottom wheels are on, I want to make sure that it's rolling free, and I'll slide it all the way over, and in this case you can see that it's touching at the bottom, but there's a gap at the top. So that means one side needs to come down a little bit and the other side needs to come up a little, but we'll come back and do all of the adjustments at once. Right now I'm just going to set the inside top rollers to the highest spot, just like I did on the outside. Then I'll put on the bottom two rollers. The bottom two rollers just act as anti-lift devices so that someone can't pick the panel up and off of the header accidentally. Of course, you already knew that. Again, get the bottom rollers on, finger tight. Now I've worked with quite a few different types of these glass barn door type shower enclosures, but the Cambridge series is my favorite so far. Just really like the way that the parts go together. I like the quality of the parts. I find that they're machined well. Now that we have all of the rollers on, we can start to adjust the glass panels. As you see, as we turn this top roller, the glass comes over, fits nice and tight. Now we've got a nice straight reveal on that edge. Move over to the other side, and on the left we have the same thing where it's touching at the bottom, but there's still a gap at the top. As we turn the wheel, glass comes over, making the reveal nice and tight. That's how we like it. We'll slide the glass back and forth a little here. Make sure we like the way that it's gliding on the header. Looks good. Meets my inspection. Now we're going to adjust these bottom rollers. Now the idea here is to get just enough friction to where the wheel actually turns, just barely touching the header. Remember, the purpose of these is just simply to stop from being able to lift the glass off the header. So we don't want it adding any friction. So we adjust each one a little bit until it's just starting to spin, and then we know that they're good. Now we're moving on to the plastics. The plastic stoppers. These are polycarbonate extrusions that are included in the kit. They help keep the water in at each edge where the glass meets the tile, and just acts as a bumper, stop the glass from colliding with the tile. So this is how I do it. I set the plastic in place, I close the door on it, make a mark, and using my trusty shears, I just snip it right off. Now these are provided with pre-applied VHB tape. Get the tile really clean first, then set it in place. And I just use the glass to hold it in place because I know that's exactly where I want it to go. Once I have it where I want it, I start to peel the plastic off of the VHB tape. Just part of it, and then slip it back into place. Again, slide the door back over to hold it there, and then start to add a little bit of pressure to get the tape to actually adhere. And I just work it down, peeling and pushing as I go, keeping the glass in place, and it seems to work pretty well. Plastic goes on there nice and smooth. You can back the glass away and push it back in from time to time just to make sure that it is landing where I want it. I am going to come back later and put a bead of silicone all the way down this edge to make it hold a little bit more permanently than just the tape by itself. Now I'll go ahead and roll the door over, double check, make sure it's landing exactly how I like it. That looks pretty good. Go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. Put the plastic in place, slide the glass over to it. The glass is actually kind of pinching it, holding it in place. Come on up to the top, mark it right at the top of the glass. And I know that's the perfect height. Take the plastic out, cut it with my snippers. I'm going to start to peel the plastic off the back of the tape to get it ready. I set it in place and slide the glass over to it. Once I get it started, I'll continue to peel that plastic backing off the tape and work it on as I go, little by little. It's way easier to do it this way. just a few inches at a time. And that way it's easy to make sure that it's going exactly where you want it. So after these are on, I'll come back and run a bead of RTV silicone along the outside edge just to keep it glued on more permanently. I'll add the towel bars, of course, but I don't need to show you how to do that. You know how to put on the towel bars. In fact, you probably know all this stuff already. But I really appreciate your taking time to watch my video. I hope I did shed some light on some things for you. Thank you so much for being a supporter on Patreon. Really appreciate it. It's because of you guys that I'm able to do this, make these videos and post them. So keep watching. There's more to come.